So, I was debating on whether or not I should do this video or not, but considering the circumstances of this occasion, I might as well do it. Over 3 years ago, I made my 10-word review on every SpongeBob pre-movie episode, and it's not good. A lot of my problems from my 2019 and 2020 reviews can be found in this one as well. I was still trying to find my footing with these videos. I was still 17 years old when I was making that video, and it was around the time my bias side was still showing. I mean, I was way too generous giving out 10 out of 10 scores. In fact, of the 16 10 out of 10 episodes, only a quarter of them still retain it. Not only that, but when I reviewed them in my top 15, a lot of the dialogue I used was stripped straight out of other 10-word reviews. The only difference is I was keeping the topic of SpongeBob in mind. And I'm actually really glad I made the decision to stop doing 10-word reviews. Because after 5 strikes in a row, I think I had it much better when I did my top 5s instead. Now, I don't think they're really anything all that special, but I was a lot more confident with my top 10s than I was with my 10-word reviews. And this brings us to where we are today. I want to try to improve myself with my pre-movie review. Since I've been rewatching the pre-movie episodes as an adult now, I want to see how much my opinion has changed since I was still an adolescent. With my top 10 favorite and least favorite SpongeBob pre-movie episodes. The rules are the same as last time. These are all based off of my opinions, and if you disagree with me on some of them, then that's perfectly understandable. Also, since this is a top 10, I'm going to alternate between each list. So, 10th best, 10th worst, 9th best, 9th worst, blah blah blah. Anyways, we got a long list to get through, so let's get started. Starting off this list, we have an episode that was actually in my original top 3. That episode being Rocka Bye Bye Valve. I think the reason it was in my top 3 was because I had an interesting bit of nostalgia for this episode. Because it's both my mom and my little sister's favorite episode of the show. I don't think my mom really watches the show all that much on her own, but this is one of 2 episodes she immediately thinks of when someone brings up SpongeBob. And I can definitely see why she really likes this episode. Watching SpongeBob and Patrick nurse his baby Scout as if it was their own is really endearing. And they do go the extra mile with this whole situation, having Patrick play the role as the overworking father. And the episode does supply plenty of funny jokes here and there. But there are a few things that kind of bugged me upon rewatch. That being, some of the moments felt like it did drag on for way longer than it should. Plus, there were times where the Scouts crying did kind of get a bit under my skin. But you can't expect much out of babies in media aside from charm factor, which the Scout does have considering it's an animal. Overall, it's a good episode, just not as good as I initially thought. I still stand by Season 1 being the weakest of the first 3 seasons. There are some really great episodes sprinkled here and there, but there were also still some notably bad or forgettable episodes from this season. And one of those is MuscleBob Buff Pants. My issue with this episode is that it's really boring. It's basically just a liar's act story, where SpongeBob purchased a pair of inflatable gloves to make it look like muscles, and flaunting about them without them finding out that they're fake. I'll admit there are a couple jokes that were kind of funny, like the ending joke in the vision scene did kind of get a smirk out of me, and the moments with the stat tracker was also pretty funny.
200 yards!
Wow, let's see an instant replay.
But aside from that, most of it just fell flat for me. And sometimes they drag out some of these jokes for so long.
Here's your drink, sir.
Thank you.
Overall, I just did not have a fun experience with this episode. And while it's not the worst of this season, it doesn't change the fact that it's still very tedious. Chocolate with Nuts is basically one of those gag-centered episodes. And thankfully, most of the jokes presented in this episode did land for me. I mean, do I even need to mention the elephant in the room? Chocolate! And the payoff is actually really hilarious as well. That being said, there are a couple of duds in this episode. Most notably, the scene where SpongeBob's opening a bunch of candy bar bags. Like, it felt like that went on for way longer than it should. There's also the scene with the guy who doesn't like chocolate. Like, that didn't do much for me. But with the occasional dud, there is an eventual banger. My favorite ones being the scenes with the con artist.
Yes?
Huh? Say, weren't you the same guy who sold us these candy bar bags?
I don't recall.
There's not really much else to say about this episode other than the fact that it's just funny. Because that's exactly what this episode's trying to be. I mean, the show is a comedy after all. I didn't care that much about Wormy as a kid, but rewatching it, it felt a lot more frustrating. Because for the first few minutes, I was kind of enjoying myself. Watching SpongeBob and Patrick bond with Wormy was really charming. And they also managed to supply plenty of funny jokes throughout most of the beginning, with the exception of that vor joke.
What's that lump in his belly?
Well, that's his dinner.
But once Wormy metamorphosizes into a butterfly, that's when the episode starts to fall flat on its face. I understand the whole intention with this episode, because SpongeBob and Patrick never really seen a real butterfly before, but that doesn't make this whole running gag funny. It's just really repetitive, not helped by the fact that SpongeBob and Patrick only make the entire situation even worse. Why? Because comedy, damn it!
Run, everybody run! Monster!
What the is this? That is not funny. That is not.
Yeah, when you find yourself thinking it's unfunny even as a kid, that's a sign of how bad it is. And we don't even get much of a satisfactory ending. I think a better direction is to have everyone get SpongeBob to defend them. And as he gets closer to Wormy, he feels a familiar connection. But no, that's not what they want. That wouldn't be funny. Well, it's not like the rest of this episode is all that funny. All in all, this episode has a pretty good first half, but a horrible second half. I don't know what it is about pickles that makes it really enjoyable. Maybe it's the whole situation of the episode. If this is meant to be the first complaint SpongeBob received as a fry cook, then it makes it even more interesting seeing how much it gets into his head. And they do manage to supply plenty of funny jokes in regards to the situation.
Oh yeah, it was mattress, SpongeBob, mattress, then sheets, pillow. Good night, Gary. Aw, this isn't right. Good night, Gary. Wait, this isn't right either. Wrong. Nope. Negative. Come on, get it right.
Or maybe it's just the character of Bubble Bass. He feels like one of those love-to-hate kind of characters. And I like the banter he and SpongeBob have. I'll admit, a few of the moments in this episode did go on for longer than it should have. Like the whole training bit. But they do try to compensate that with the payoff. I did have a great overall time with this episode. It's just good vibes all around. Nothing too crazy, but it's still really good for the most part. Hey, what if we made an episode that revolves around one annoying sound? Squeaky Boots is just a really repetitive episode. I do like some aspects of it, most notably the Telltale Heart reference. That's the one scene that really stuck in my mind.
Yes, I did it! I took the boots! They're here! Under the floorboard! Please, make it stop! It's a squeaking of the hideous boots!
Aside from that, it's literally just a bunch of squeaking noises, and it's really annoying. I get that's the intention, but like Josh said, intentionally annoying can still be pretty annoying. And this is a good example of one of those episodes. I mean, we all have to have felt like Mr. Krabs listening to the squeakiness of the boots, right? There is still some funny moments. Like there are some creative ways that SpongeBob uses the boots.
Can I take your order?
Yeah, I'll have the Krusty Special.
Thank you, sir. I will squeak when it's ready.
And the 2 times Mr. Krabs got his foot stuck on the wooden floorboard did generally get a laugh out of me. But other than that, it's still a really annoying episode. Scaredy Pants still remains my favorite episode of the season 1. I know most people would say episodes like Pizza Delivery or SB129, but while the latter did get a little better on rewatch, I still find both of them a bit overrated. And while Scaredy Pants got a little weaker on rewatch, I still consider it the highlight of the season. I really like the atmosphere in this episode, as with most Halloween specials. And they do put in some creative moments and jokes, like the campfire story and the different costumes the characters wear. And of course, we get the introduction of the Flying Dutchman, one of my favorite recurring characters in the show. I always loved his appearances thanks to his writing and Brian Doyle Murray's performance. And his debut definitely stands right up there with some of his best appearances in the show.
You bet your lily white livers I'm the Flying Dutchman. And I'll let you in on a little secret. I'm going to steal your soul. Quiet!
And I also really love that ending reveal. From the Flying Dutchman's initial reaction, which leads into the reveal of what SpongeBob looked like, followed by everyone else's reaction. The whole ending had me laughing on the floor.
I guess it was your pink hat.
Pink hat? Oh, that's not a hat. That's my brain.
Oh.
If I had to complain about something, it would be a few of the jokes and line deliveries. Like, I'm not normally a fan of when characters talk just like this. And it's the one recurring gag in Halloween episodes that does kind of get under my skin.
Roar! Ooh, I'm the Flying Dutchman.
But I'm really just nitpicking. This is still a really great episode, and it's easily my favorite episode of season 1. I mentioned before that I'm a bit conflicted with how I feel about Sandy. And while this isn't her worst appearance in the show, I still find Survival of the Idiots to be really irritating. I really hate seeing Sandy's aggressive side in most episodes, mainly when it's for no reason other than just for laughs. And this episode is no exception. And SpongeBob and Patrick are kind of dumb for deciding to intrude on Sandy's place, especially after being explicitly told not to. Sure, watching SpongeBob and Patrick duke it out in the snow was kind of funny.
Hey, that's not fair. Cowboys couldn't afford cannons.
They couldn't afford station wagons either.
Nice paneling.
But it just keeps going downhill as we go forward. Has some of its moments, but wow, it just really got on my nerves. As a kid, I never looked forward to watching this episode. Not helped by the fact that it's also paired up with another terrible episode, which we'll get to in a moment. But even putting that aside, the episode just still frustrates me every time I watch it. And here we have the first of 2 episodes that were not featured in my original top 15. Franken Doodle. I really love the concept behind this episode. SpongeBob and Patrick bringing drawings to life with a magic pencil. That sounds interesting, and the execution is really well done. DoodleBob made for a great one-time character, serving as a great antagonist to this episode. On top of that, the jokes in this episode are on point, with very few duds throughout this episode, and most of them do play into the concept of the episode. It's shocking that I didn't think to put this in my original top 15 because it's really fantastic. It's actually an episode that's worthy of a 10 out of 10. With that said, not all of it is perfect. While I did praise the humor of this episode, there was one joke that got under my skin.
No matter. I was voted most artistic in high school.
Ouch! SpongeBob, you're gonna pay for that!
Maybe it was most clumsy.
Plus, I do wish they played more into the idea of bringing drawings to life. Like having DoodleBob actually draw an army. But that's really more nitpicky, and at least they do actually do that in a later episode. As well as the Drawn to Life SpongeBob Edition game, which is an awesome game that I recommend you should play. Overall, I really love this episode, and I feel like a dummy for not including it in my original list. And here we have my least favorite episode of Season 1, Hall Monitor. Another good example of how something intentionally annoying can still get really annoying. Not only does SpongeBob make for a terrible authority member on the streets, but he makes such boneheaded decisions that it's not even comical.
I'm the open window maniac.
It's so funny. It's such a good joke. No, it's not. That wasn't funny.
Speaking of which, the humor in this episode is honestly really dull. I think I chuckled once at one of the visual gags. And there was a little smirk on some of the line deliveries.
He's just standing there, menacingly.
But other than that, it's mostly just repetitive. Not to mention this introduced one of my least favorite running gags in the show. That being the moments where Mrs. Puff gets arrested for SpongeBob's actions. Sometimes they try to justify it, but sometimes they just do it for bullshit reasons, or for no real reason other than the fact that it's funny. It's not. It's just kind of infuriating, especially in situations where the other characters like SpongeBob get off scot-free. Overall, this is just a dull mess, and I have no problems calling it my least favorite episode of Season 1. Big Pink Loser is basically another gag-centered episode, much like Chocolate with Nuts. But this time it follows Patrick trying to win an award like SpongeBob. And the episode does a good job of making me want to root for Patrick for the most part. Maybe he went a bit too far when he started trying to impersonate SpongeBob, but they try to compensate that by giving us some really funny jokes.
I'm the jump rope champion of Bikini Bottom.
Me too.
Oh yeah? I call this one the slice and dice. Ha! Not a scratch on me.
Oh, no, you don't.
And yeah, I don't think there was really any duds in this episode. They all managed to get a grin, chuckle, or even a laugh out of me. And I think the episode ends itself off on a great note. Having Patrick get awarded for something he's known for, doing absolutely nothing for longer than anyone else. Doesn't seem like much when you think about it, but it's nice to see Patrick actually earn something. Overall, it's a really enjoyable episode. And I think it deserves the 10 out of 10 I initially gave it. Good on you, Big Pink Loser, for retaining your quality. You deserve an award for that. Okay, I'll admit, I may have been a little harsh on Dumped. I wasn't holding any bars trashing on this episode, and it was mainly because of childhood bias. But it doesn't change the fact that the episode is still just painful. It was really hard to sit through SpongeBob trying so desperately to get Gary's attention back, and Patrick just flaunting about how he deserves him. Sure, he tries to encourage SpongeBob to let it go, but he still acts pretty selfish with Gary. At least it's not yours, mine, and mine levels of selfish, but Patrick still somehow managed to get on my nerves. But the one saving grace of this episode is a couple of the jokes.
Sit, Rex, sit. Now stay, Rex, stay. Good boy, Rex. Who's a good boy? Who's a good boy? Who's a good boy?
But other than that, I still really don't like this episode. I'll admit that I was a little hard on it, but I still consider it the most painful pre-movie episode to sit through. I seriously cannot sit through this episode again without getting a twinge. And here is the second to last episode not on my original list. Crusty Love. In my opinion, this is honestly one of the funniest episodes of the entire show. I don't know what it is about it that makes it so hysterical, but seeing Mr. Krabs so love-struck just has me cackling. It's a side of Mr. Krabs I don't think we've seen until this point, but man, the jokes they pull off with this are just golden. Like the scene where Mr. Krabs tries to ask Mrs. Puff out. From the delivery of Clancy Brown's gibberish talk and SpongeBob trying to help out Mr. Krabs.
Oh, I think Mr. Krabs is saying that he'd like to hit you with a rake.
Goodness!
No!
Try to guess your weight.
Well,
No, wait, he wants to take you on a date.
I also like how Mr. Krabs is so lost in Mrs. Puff, he ends up spending so much on her. And his reaction also got a laugh out of me.
What? $100? Well, this can't possibly be correct.
Oh, my mistake, sir. Thank you for pointing that out. This is your bill.
And the whole second act of the episode is just wow. Seeing Mr. Krabs go back and forth with his feelings is just hysterical to me. It's clear that Clancy is having a really fun time with his delivery as well.
SpongeBob! Mrs. Puff needs a new fur coat! You're spending all my money! Puffy needs a new pair of shoes! You're breaking me, boy! She needs fine jewelry! Not that
All of this makes for a really enjoyable episode, on top of having an interesting execution story-wise. Like I said, I like the idea of Mr. Krabs flip-flopping back and forth between his love of money and Mrs. Puff. It's just really nice to watch. So yeah, I think it's a really great episode. And it's nice to hear that Mr. Krabs and Mrs. Puff got back together in season 10. Great to know that the writers picked up on that episode. Remember when I said Mr. Krabs' cheapness can be a bit of a coin flip? Well, Born Again Krabs is an example of this gag done horribly. Most of his actions presented in this episode are terrible. Like seriously, feeding a moldy Krabby Patty to his customers? Anyone with a brain would know that is a bad idea. Especially since there's an episode in this season where you tried to feed a customer a tainted patty and that didn't go so well. At least you do get this funny fake out gag.
Oh, look, an ambulance.
But his horrible actions don't stop there. Now he lies his way out of Davy Jones's locker and goes back to his cheap ways when he realizes he's awake. And as if all that wasn't bad enough, SpongeBob has the audacity to defend Mr. Krabs. Not helped by the fact that he's proven wrong when Mr. Krabs sells SpongeBob for measly change. What the f*** is wrong with him? At least Squidward calls him out for this, but then the episode just undoes Mr. Krabs' actions as if none of it happened. No apology, no character development, nothing. Born Again Krabs is a terrible episode. But would you believe me if I said they followed it up with another terrible Krabs-centered episode? Because Krabby Land has some similar issues. This time with Mr. Krabs performing child exploitation. How wonderful! Maybe I'm just taking this too seriously, but at least Krabs had some moments where his cheapness were funny. Here, it's just kind of frustrating. And this episode's one recurring joke is that SpongeBob constantly injures himself for the kids' amusement.
Hey, kids, check this out.
Has its moments, but overall, it's just not really enjoyable. Between Born Again Krabs and Krabby Land, I wasn't sure on which episode was worse. They both have advantages and disadvantages that weigh each other out. Born Again Krabs does have a few funny moments, and the Flying Dutchman and Squidward were kind of enjoyable. While Krabby Land does have an interesting concept that's a bit nostalgic to me, since I have gone to the McDonald's play places when I was little, even if I was horrified of going up there. Mainly because I was worried it wasn't all that stable. But they're both bogged down by the same problem of Mr. Krabs being unlikable. So I decided to put them both in the same spot. That might sound like cheating, but I really can't decide which is worse. Alright, now onto the episode you all knew was going to be high up on this list. Geeks is an absolute masterpiece from beginning to end. Any problems I would have with this episode would require me to scrape the very bottom of the barrel. And even then, it would mostly just come down to nitpicks. Otherwise, everything about this episode is phenomenal. The jokes in this episode are just comedy gold, without a single joke falling on its face.
So if we play loud, people might think we're good. Everybody ready? And a 1, and a 2, and a 1, 2, 3, 4.
The characters are all really enjoyable. We really want to root for Squidward. Even if he was initially lying at first, he's so determined to form up a band for the performance. And by the end, everyone decides to put their weight together to help Squidward, resulting in a phenomenal musical performance. Sweet Victory feels like the embodiment of euphoriaism. Every time I watch it, I'm just in awe with the presentation of it. Looking awesome visually in context and sounding great on its own. It's just incredible to watch. Overall, this is a really fantastic episode, and it's absolutely worth the praise it receives. Even if I think there are 2 episodes that are a little bit better. I mentioned a few entries ago that I don't like the running gag of Mrs. Puff getting arrested. Well, apparently the writers thought that gag was so funny that it deserved its own episode. I'm standing by my opinion here. I still really hate doing time. As if having a horrible concept wasn't bad enough, the episode itself is just as terrible. And if you've seen my initial pre-movie review, you would know that this was my original least favorite episode of the first 3 seasons. And you're probably thinking, why is it number 3 on my list? Well, there was one positive element upon rewatch. The beginning of the episode was really funny. In fact, I'd argue the funniest jokes were from the first few minutes.
We're gonna straighten you out!
This'll fix you. Now let's get that one.
Barnacles, did you see that?
Yeah, that guy had no front license plate. Let's get him.
That being said, holy sh! I have no clue what was going on when they were writing this episode. So apparently Mrs. Puff was alright with being in prison, which is an aspect I feel worked a lot better in The Getaway as a joke. How do you manage that? And the way SpongeBob tried to break into prison is just not funny. And SpongeBob just had to drag Patrick along just to make it even funnier. And... okay, I was gonna say this for another video, but I really need to bring this up. Remember back in my Season 9 video, I said this? I'm not normally a fan of the authorities in the SpongeBob universe, and I'll explain more in detail why, but all I'll say is, they give Grand Theft Auto's police a run for their money. Well, while this isn't the worst I've seen of them, this episode is still a good example of why I don't like them. They're just complete dumbasses. Not only pinning all the blame on Mrs. Puff and letting SpongeBob get off scot-free, but they can't even prevent SpongeBob and Patrick from breaking in constantly, even when they're right in their sight lines. I mean, just look at this bullshit.
There's a crazed ex-student of mine and his overweight friend here to break me out!
That's just raw material used to make coat hangers.
Hold up! Freeze frame! You guys seen this?
And the ending... it's like they had no clue on how they were going to end this episode off. So they just decided to take all the endings they could think of and squish them together and package it as an illusion ending, making the whole situation feel meaningless. Even as a kid, it made me thought, that's it? That's how it ends? Well, then what was the point of all that? Overall, this episode still sucks. But surprisingly, I managed to come across 2 episodes that were worse. But before we get to that... And now we have my favorite episode of Season 2. Christmas Who is pretty much right up there as one of my favorite Christmas specials of all time. Seeing Bikini Bottom go through their very first Christmas is absolutely charming. The song of the episode is also really enjoyable. And at least I don't have a mother who constantly sings this song even when it's not Christmas.
Don't be a jerk.
No! None of that! Shame on you!
It's also nice seeing Squidward understand the true meaning of Christmas over time. And it's nice to see him uplift SpongeBob after what's happened. It's really sweet to watch. Topped off with some really funny jokes.
Here you go, SpongeBob.
What did you wish for, Patrick?
Another piece of paper.
And a great overall atmosphere. And while it may not be my favorite Christmas special of all time, that title goes to How the Grinch Stole Christmas. This special is still an absolute delight and is easily my favorite episode of Season 2. You guys remember that era where Patrick was really unlikable? Well, it looks like Season 2 beat them to it because we got I'm With Stupid. Like, holy hell, this episode got so much worse on rewatch. I understand what the writers were doing with this episode. SpongeBob acts stupid to make Patrick look smarter by comparison, but Patrick is so stupid that he ends up forgetting the mission. Granted, it's not as bad as his moments from Stuck in the Ringer, Yours, Mine, and Mine, or Pet Sitter Pat, but oh my god, I think they went a little too far with this joke. Like, he stops treating SpongeBob like an idiot for the mission, and more treats it like genuine thought.
Patrick, I get the feeling that you think I really am dumb.
That's just what I'd expect you to say. Dumb people are always blissfully unaware of how dumb they really are.
I get he doesn't 100% mean it, but it's not funny. And we don't even get a moment where Patrick apologizes to SpongeBob. So they end up making Patrick really unlikable for no real reason. And even after all that, we get a massive middle finger from the writers.
Excuse me, does this lovely couple belong to you? They've been standing outside my house saying, "Where's Patrick?" all day. It's driving me nuts!
Mom! Dad!
Wow, son! You actually recognized us this time.
And you remembered to get dressed today.
Oh, that's right, honey. We don't have a son.
Oh, yeah.
What the f? I'm honestly really baffled this was in the first 3 seasons. Because while it's not as bad as some of his moments from seasons 6 through 8, if I didn't know any better, I would have mistaked it from coming out of those seasons. I can't even say the jokes in this episode are all that funny, because most of it comes down to the disrespectful quips Patrick makes. I mean, the note joke did kind of leave a smirk on me, and I could kind of see the potential of meeting Patrick's family. Not counting the Patrick show. But other than that, it's just a complete mess. The only question is, what's worse? Before I reveal my number 1 picks, I want to toss in a few honorable and dishonorable mentions. Let's start with the honorable mentions. The algae's always greener. I like the what-if scenario this episode presents, but it did get a bit repetitive the further we got. Employee of the Month. I considered putting this episode on this list, but I think Bandy summed up this episode much better than I could. Plankton. Like I said in my original video, it's the introduction to my favorite character. How could I not love it? Pressure. They took the idea of 2 friends bickering and fighting over which is better and made it into a really funny episode. Plus, I love the puppetry segment during the last act. Snowball effect. I'm a sucker for winter-themed episodes, and this is no exception. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 3 and 5. 2 very excellent Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy centered episodes, but not good enough to make this list. Can you spare a dime? Seeing SpongeBob so fed up with Squidward is something I didn't expect to like, but here we are. The sponge who could fly. Not as good as I initially thought, but I still consider it underrated. And finally, midlife crustacean. I could sometimes be a sucker for adult humor, and most of them in this episode did get some smirks out of me. But that's really towards the second half of the episode. Now onto the dishonorable mentions. Party Pooper Pants is a really boring and mean-spirited episode, but the Padgy segments do save it. The Great Snail Race. Has a really bad first half, but an admittedly enjoyable second half. I Had an Accident. For a gag-centered episode, most of the jokes didn't really land for me. Jellyfishing. While it's not as painful as other Squidward torture episodes, it does still carry a lot of the problems those episodes has, such as slow pacing and unfunny humor. At least SpongeBob and Patrick got their karma. Sleepy Time. Definitely got a lot better on rewatch, and it probably wouldn't have ended up as a dishonorable mention if it wasn't for... The Paper. Has some cute and creative moments, but it's still really boring, and I really didn't like the ending. Fools in April. Even though Squidward went a bit too far with his prank, I didn't really blame him because aside from the ice cube prank and the lemonade joke, SpongeBob got so irritating. Bubble Stand. Outside of the admittingly cool technique, the episode was so boring. Mermaid Man and Barnacle Boy 4. Really annoying and repetitive, plus also has Vor. But at least it gave us Wumbo. Finally, Squirrel Jokes. A really mean-spirited episode, and it would have easily made it on my worst list if it wasn't for that kinda decent last act. Consider this the unofficial number 11. Anyways, on to our number 1s. Going into this list, I was wondering what opinions I was gonna stand by, and... oh, who am I kidding? Yeah, Planktons Army is still my favorite episode of the first 3 seasons. And one of my favorite episodes of the show, period. The idea of the episode is really interesting. Getting to see Plankton's family does have merit, and I'm happy to say that it did not disappoint. It was really nice to see Plankton's relatives, and it's cool to see them all work together to steal the formula, which actually looked like it came close to victory, up until we get to the reveal, but I'll get to that in a moment. As for the humor of the episode, it's really good. The name-calling and the grass joke being 2 of my favorite jokes of the entire show.
Look around you, Krabs. You planted grass? Grass?
And even some of the other jokes, like the ones from the beginning, can be really funny. And then we get the ending reveal and...
4 heaping pounds of freshly ground plankton?
I warned you.
Okay, that never gets old. Like, I knew that was a fake, but it doesn't make it any less funny. Especially with some of the jokes that follow it up.
I got it hidden in most secret hiding place. A place no one, not even Plankton, would ever figure out.
Let me guess. It's at home, under your mattress.
So, yeah, I really like this episode a lot. It has a great concept and execution, hilarious moments, and it's nice to see more of Plankton's backstory. That is why Planktons Army stands as my favorite episode of the first 3 seasons. And on the other end... I honestly went a bit back and forth with my bottom 3 entries. In fact, if I didn't rewatch these episodes, I probably would have likely kept doing times at the bottom spot. But after taking my time to really think about it, I made my decision. Grandma's Kisses is one of the worst episodes of the entire show. It may not be as abysmal as some of my least favorite episodes from season 6 or 7, but it's still just terrible. The opening leaves you with a false sense of security and making you think it's just going to be a sweet and enjoyable episode, before it turns into a mean-spirited and hypocritical piece of hot garbage. Basically, the Bikini Bottomites at the Krusty Krab make fun of SpongeBob for loving his grandmother. Not only does it make them look like scumbags, but them ridiculing him is even more childish than what SpongeBob is doing. Who on earth would find that funny? It doesn't help that after this moment, SpongeBob acts even more juvenile than usual.
I don't want to grow up. I want cookies and milky. I want a sweater with love in the stitches. I want to wear tighties. I want to ride in my wagon. I want to cuddle waddle with Mr. Stuffy Kids.
We then get Patrick trying to help SpongeBob grow more into maturity, but then Patrick pulls a 180 and goes back to his childlike nature after helping SpongeBob learn how to act like an adult. Why is he your friend again, SpongeBob? I also hate adult stereotyping, and this episode is no exception. Like, what, you're saying adults can't have cookies? Yeah, tell that to my dad. Also, giving your grandson office supplies? Really? That'd be like giving your younger child a lawnmower to mow your lawn. This is so stupid. I had to wonder if this episode was actually written by 5-year-olds. At least we do get a decent message about family and maturity, and speaking as an adult, I can concur with that. But like I said in my Season 7 video, it doesn't matter if an episode has a good message on paper. It's important to take account of how you execute it. And the direction this episode took in order to get across this message is just unbearable. It's not the worst episode I've seen in this show, but I would say it's right up there in my bottom 15. And that's what makes Grandma's Kisses my least favorite episode of the first 3 seasons.
This isn't funny!
So yeah, that's my ranking. I'm really glad I made this video. Not just to improve what I did back then and give out my definitive ranking, but also to be given a refresher of why I like this show so much. Because it actually felt like I was starting to lose interest in the show, mainly with Nickelodeon oversaturating the series following Hillenburg's passing. I mean, I originally considered reviewing Camp Coral, but I got 1 episode in and was like, nope, not happening. Same thing goes with the Patrick Star show. And with some of the episodes I've seen of season 13, I began to wonder if I was just getting too old for the show. So it felt nice coming back to the first 3 seasons, as it was a good reminder of why I consider it one of my favorite shows of all time. Now, I haven't seen every TV show out there, both in animation and live action. And for what I have heard of them, they felt like they have a lot more going for it. But a piece of media doesn't always have to be complex for me to like it. I sung my praises of Wii Sports not that long ago. And there are also some animated movies I really love that aren't as complex. As long as I find myself enjoying it, then I could say it's good. And the first 3 seasons of SpongeBob SquarePants are perfect examples of that. I really enjoyed watching this show a lot as a kid, and I still find plenty of enjoyment out of it today. It's not perfect, but rarely anything is. And even if the show falls into obscurity at some point, I'll still always look back on the early days of the show. Anyways, thank you all for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. And if you did, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell to be notified when my next video is coming out. And until next time, ciao.